What you're about to witness will challenge everything you thought you knew about fatherhood in the animal kingdom. A lioness, exhausted and desperate, did the unthinkable. She walked away from her 3 newborn cubs, leaving them vulnerable in the tall grass, their eyes barely open, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold dawn. The pride watched in silence. The other females turned their backs. But then, against all instinct, against everything science told us about male lions, the father did something that left wildlife experts speechless. This isn't just a story about survival. This is about a choice that defied nature itself. The sun hadn't fully risen over the golden plains of Cedar Valley when Sarah Mitchell, a wildlife researcher stationed at the Grassland Conservation Center, received an urgent radio call from her field partner. Something unusual was happening near the northern ridge, where a small pride of lions had been under observation for the past 6 months. Sarah grabbed her camera equipment and binoculars, her hands shaking slightly, not from the cold morning air, but from the tone in her partner's voice. In 15 years of studying big cats, she had learned that when experienced researchers sound concerned, you move fast. The pride consisted of 7 adults, 3 lionesses, 2 younger males who served as sentries, and the dominant male they called Atlas. Atlas was magnificent, a lion whose very presence commanded respect across the entire territory. His mane was thick and dark, a sign of health and power, and his amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. This wasn't just any lion. This was a king who had fought for his throne and held it against challengers twice his desperation. In the animal kingdom, territory isn't just land, it's everything. It's food, safety, legacy. It's the difference between a bloodline that continues and one that disappears into dust. But on this particular morning, something was terribly wrong. Keisha, one of the pride's lionesses and Atlas's primary mate, had given birth 3 days earlier to 3 tiny cubs in a sheltered hollow beneath an acacia tree. The birth had been difficult, Sarah had observed from a distance, noting how Keisha struggled, how the labor stretched on far longer than typical. When the cubs finally arrived, 2 males and 1 female, they seemed smaller than average, their cries weaker. Still, Keisha had done what mothers do. She licked them clean, pulled them close to her belly, and for those first precious hours, everything seemed as it should be. But nature doesn't always follow the script we expect. By the second day, Sarah noticed changes in Keisha's behavior. The lioness seemed agitated, restless. She would nurse the cubs briefly, then stand and pace, her tail twitching with visible anxiety. The other females in the pride, Luna and Zara, kept their distance, which was unusual. Typically, lionesses share cub-rearing duties, creating a nursery system that strengthens the pride. But not this time. Luna and Zara stayed with the main group, their body language making it clear these cubs were not their concern. On the morning of the 3rd day, Keisha made her decision. Sarah watched through her telephoto lens as the lioness stood, looked down at her sleeping cubs one final time, and then simply walked away. Not slowly, not with hesitation, but with purpose. She rejoined the pride near the water hole, over half a mile away, and didn't look back. The 3 cubs, now alone, began to cry. Their tiny mews carried across the grassland, sounds so fragile and desperate that even Sarah, separated by distance and years of professional detachment, felt her throat tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lionesses are devoted mothers. They starve themselves to feed their young. They fight off hyenas, leopards, and even male lions to protect their cubs. Abandonment is rare, typically occurring only when cubs are sick, deformed, or when the mother herself is too weak to survive. Sarah radioed the conservation headquarters, her voice urgent. "We have 3 abandoned cubs at Grid 17. Mother has rejoined the pride. Request guidance on intervention protocols." The response came back quickly. "Observe only. Do not interfere unless the cubs are in immediate danger from predators. Let nature take its course. Let nature take its course." Sarah hated those words. even though she understood their necessity. Human intervention in wildlife situations often causes more harm than good, disrupting natural selection processes that have existed for millions of years. But watching those 3 tiny lives fade away felt like torture. She settled into her observation post, her camera recording, her heart heavy. The cubs cried for their mother. They crawled in circles, searching for her warmth, her milk, her protection. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose. In a few hours, dehydration would set in. By nightfall, if they survived that long, hyenas would pick up their scent. Then Atlas appeared. Sarah almost dropped her binoculars. The massive male lion approached the hollow where the cubs lay, his movements careful, almost cautious. Male lions have a terrible reputation when it comes to cubs, especially cubs they didn't father. When a new male takes over a pride, his first act is often infanticide, killing all existing cubs to bring the females into heat sooner, ensuring his own genetic legacy. Even fathers rarely show interest in very young cubs. That's the mother's job. Males protect territory, lead hunts occasionally, and mate. They don't babysit. But Atlas wasn't following the rules. He lowered his enormous head toward the cubs, sniffing them carefully. One of the males, the larger of the two, reached up with a tiny paw, touching Atlas's nose. Sarah held her breath. This could go terrible wrong in an instant. One swipe from those massive paws, even playful, could kill all 3 cubs. But Atlas didn't strike. Instead, he did something Sarah had never witnessed in all her years studying lions. He lay down, his body forming a protective barrier around the cubs, and began to gently lick them, the same grooming behavior mothers use to comfort and bond with their offspring. Where are you watching this video from? Spain, Mexico, Chile, the United States, or somewhere I can't imagine? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where this story resonates with you. For the next hour, Sarah documented something extraordinary. Atlas stayed with those cubs, his presence keeping them warm, his occasional low rumbles seeming to calm their distressed cries. When vultures began circling overhead, attracted by the sound of vulnerable prey, Atlas stood and roared, a sound so powerful it echoed across the valley, sending every scavenger within 2 miles fleeing. This was a declaration broadcast to every predator in the territory. These cubs were under his protection. Touch them, and face the consequences. But protection alone wouldn't save them. The cubs needed milk, and Atlas couldn't provide that. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched the tiny lions grow weaker. Their cries became softer, their movements less frequent. Atlas seemed to understand. He stood, looked back at the pride in the distance, and then did something else unprecedented. He picked up the smallest cub, the female, by the scruff of her neck, the way mothers carry their babies, and began walking toward the pride. Sarah grabbed her radio. This is Mitchell at Grid 17. You need to see this. The father is attempting to return the cubs to the pride. Repeating, the father lion is carrying the cubs. I've never seen anything like this. Atlas walked with purpose, carrying the female cub while the 2 males followed behind, stumbling on unsteady legs but driven by instinct to stay close to the only protector they had. The journey was slow, agonizing. Every few minutes, Atlas would stop, set down the female, and use his nose to nudge the males forward when they fell behind. It was clear he had made a decision, one that flew in face of every evolutionary instinct that should have told him to walk away, to let nature eliminate the weak, to preserve his energy for cubs that had a better chance of survival. When Atlas reached the pride with the 3 cubs, the tension was immediate and palpable. Keisha raised her head from where she rested in the shade, her eyes meeting Atlas's gaze. There was a moment, Sarah captured it on camera, where everything hung in balance. Would Keisha accept the cubs back? Would the other lionesses intervene? Would Atlas force the issue, or would he back down? In the animal kingdom, pride dynamics are everything. Challenge the wrong hierarchy at the wrong moment, and the entire social structure can collapse. Atlas set down the female cub directly in front of Keisha. The tiny creature, exhausted from the journey, let out a weak cry. Atlas didn't move. He stood there, this powerful king of the grasslands, and simply waited. Luna and Zara watched from nearby, their expressions unreadable. The two younger males in the Pride, Atlas's coalition partners, stood alert but didn't interfere. This was Atlas's decision to make, and his alone. In that moment, Sarah realized she was witnessing something more than animal behavior. She was watching a father make a stand for his children, regardless of the cost. Keisha stood slowly. She walked toward the female cub, sniffed her, and then, to Sarah's amazement, began to lick her. The grooming was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if Keisha was remembering what she was supposed to do. Then instinct took over. She lay down, pulling the female cub close to her belly where the milk was. The tiny cub latched on immediately, nursing desperately. Atlas used his massive head to push the two male cubs forward, guiding them to their mother. Keisha hesitated, her body tensing, but she didn't pull away. Within moments, all three cubs were nursing, their small bodies relaxing for the first time in hours. But this wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. Sarah knew enough about lion behavior to understand that Keisha's initial abandonment had a cause, and that cause hadn't disappeared. Over the next several days, the pattern became clear. Keisha would nurse the cubs, but only irregularly. She seemed stressed, constantly looking toward the horizon, her body language screaming discomfort. The cubs weren't thriving. They should have been gaining weight, becoming more active. Instead, they remained small, their energy low. Something was fundamentally wrong, and Sarah couldn't figure out what. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Raymond Clark, a veterinarian specializing in large African mammals, visited the conservation center as part of a research exchange program. When Sarah showed him the footage of Keisha and the cubs, his expression changed immediately. "That lioness is sick," he said quietly. "Look at her movement patterns, the way she positions herself when the cubs nurse. I'd bet everything that she's dealing with some kind of infection or internal injury from the birth. She's not abandoning those cubs because she doesn't love them. She's abandoning them because every time they nurse, she's in agony. And her body is telling her that she might not survive, which means staying with the cubs could doom them all if she dies, and they're too dependent on her." Sarah felt the pieces click into place. Keisha wasn't a bad mother. She was trying to survive while managing unbearable pain. In the wild, there are no hospitals, no painkillers, no emergency C-sections. Animals either heal or they don't. And a mother's calculation becomes brutal. Save yourself so you can have more cubs later, or die trying to save these cubs and guarantee that no more of your genetics survive. It's cold evolutionary mathematics, the kind that breaks human hearts but makes perfect sense in the natural world where resources are limited and death is always one mistake away. Atlas, somehow, understood this on an instinctive level. He couldn't heal Keisha. He couldn't take away her pain. But he could do what male lions almost never do. He could share the burden of parenthood. Over the following weeks, Sarah documented behavior that wildlife experts around the world would later struggle to explain. Atlas became a co-parent in the truest sense. When Keisha needed to rest, Atlas would lie with the cubs, keeping them warm, grooming them, and even playing with them as they grew stronger. When hyenas approached the Pride at night, it was Atlas who positioned himself between the cubs and danger, his presence alone enough to deter most threats. The truly remarkable moments came during feeding time. Lions are social hunters, but there's always hierarchy at a kill. Dominant males eat first, taking the best portions. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. Except Atlas began doing something different. When the Pride brought down prey, usually zebra or wildebeest, Atlas would eat his share, but then he would carry pieces of meat back to where Keisha rested with the cubs. Not for himself, for her. He was providing for the mother of his cubs in a way that suggested not just instinct, but something deeper. Care, devotion, perhaps even what humans would recognize as love. Dr. Clark returned 3 weeks after his initial visit to check on Keisha's condition. With careful observation and non-invasive diagnostic techniques, thermal imaging and behavioral analysis, he confirmed his suspicion. Keisha had suffered a uterine infection following the birth, likely from retained placental tissue. In a human, this would require antibiotics and possibly surgery. In a lioness, it meant enduring until her body either fought off the infection or succumbed to it. The odds weren't good. Dr. Clark estimated she had perhaps a 40% chance of survival. But Keisha had something most wild animals in her position didn't have: support. While she recovered, Atlas maintained his vigilant care of the cubs. He taught them to crouch in the grass, mimicking hunting postures. He allowed them to climb on him, bite his tail, and pounce on his mane, behaviors that helped develop the coordination they would need as adults. Luna and Zara, seeing Atlas's commitment, gradually began to help as well. What started as one father's refusal to abandon his offspring became a pride-wide effort to save 3 lives that, by all natural logic, should have been lost. Sarah found herself thinking about her own father during those weeks of observation. He had raised her alone after her mother died of cancer when Sarah was 7. She remembered him learning to braid her hair for school, burning dinner repeatedly until he figured out how to cook, sitting through ballet recitals he clearly didn't understand but attended anyway because she was performing. Her father had been a construction worker, a man of few words and rough hands, but he had loved her fiercely and completely. Watching Atlas with those cubs, she saw the same thing, a fierce, complete love that didn't need words or understanding, just action, just showing up, day after day, regardless of the cost. In the territory they controlled, Atlas and his pride reigned over approximately 40 square miles of prime grassland, a fortune in the natural world. That land meant access to water sources, migrating herds, and shelter from storms. Other male lions would kill for that territory. And yet, Atlas dedicated significant time and energy not to defending his kingdom or expanding his power, but to caring for 3 tiny cubs that most males would have ignored or destroyed. Power, in that moment, wasn't about domination. It was about protection. It was about choosing to use strength not to take, but to give. By the 6th week, the miracle became undeniable. Keisha's condition improved. The infection, against considerable odds, began to clear. Her movements became less pained. Her energy returned. And most importantly, she began nursing the cubs regularly again without signs of distress. The 3 cubs, whom Sarah had begun calling Marcus, Leo, and Athena in her field notes, were growing rapidly. Their eyes were bright, their coats healthy, and their playful behavior indicated strong development. They had survived because their father had refused to accept their death sentence. But the story took another turn that challenged Sarah's understanding of animal behavior once more. As Keisha recovered, something unexpected happened. Instead of Atlas stepping back into his traditional role, he continued his active parenting. Moreover, Keisha seemed to welcome it. The 2 parents developed a system. Keisha would nurse and groom the cubs during the day when the pride rested. Atlas would guard them at night, his keen senses alert for any threat. When the cubs were old enough to start eating meat, Atlas would bring them small portions from kills, teaching them how to tear flesh and chew properly, lessons typically taught by mothers, not fathers. Luna and Zara, influenced by this new dynamic, became aunts in the truest sense. They would babysit the cubs when both Keisha and Atlas needed to hunt. They would play with them, disciplining rough behavior with gentle bats of their paws, and even carrying them to safety when a thunderstorm threatened to flood their resting area. The entire pride structure had shifted. What was once a traditional, hierarchical system with clear gender roles had become something more fluid, more cooperative. And it was working. The pride was thriving. Dr. Clark, when he reviewed Sarah's documentation, hypothesized that what they were witnessing might represent an evolutionary adaptation occurring in real time. In regions where lion populations are stressed, whether from habitat loss, reduced prey, or human conflict, we're seeing behavioral flexibility that we never observed in more stable populations, he explained during a video call with the research team. Atlas's behavior might be unusual, but it's not inexplicable. He's maximizing his genetic investment. Those 3 cubs carry his genes. In uncertain times, ensuring their survival might matter more than maintaining traditional behavioral patterns. He's adapting, and the pride is adapting with him. This is evolution happening right in front of your cameras. The conservation community began paying attention. Sarah's footage was requested by National Geographic, BBC Wildlife, and numerous research institutions. The story of Atlas and his cubs became a case study in animal behavior courses. Some scientists remained skeptical, arguing that Sarah was anthropomorphizing, projecting human emotions and motivations onto animals that were simply following complex instinctual patterns. But others saw something more profound. They saw evidence that animals, particularly highly intelligent social species like lions, might possess emotional capacities we had vastly underestimated. There's an old saying among people who spend their lives studying wildlife: the more you watch, the less you truly understand. Sarah felt that truth deeply as she observed Atlas and his family. She could document his behaviors, measure his time investment, and note the biological success of his offspring. But she couldn't know what he felt when those cubs climbed onto his back. She couldn't measure whether he experienced pride when they made their first successful pounce on a grasshopper. She couldn't determine if the low rumble he made when they curled against his mane was simply a physical reflex or an expression of contentment. The gap between observation and understanding remained infinite. As the months passed, Marcus, Leo, and Athena grew into healthy juvenile lions. They were smaller than typical cubs their age, a lasting effect of their difficult start, but they were clever, quick, and bonded closely not just to each other, but to all the adults in the pride. Athena, in particular, showed remarkable promise. She was the first of the three to successfully bring down a young hare during a practice hunt. Luna, watching from nearby, roared in what Sarah interpreted as approval. The sound made Sarah laugh, a genuine, joyful laugh that reminded her why she had chosen this difficult, often heartbreaking profession in the first place. One evening, as the sun set over the Cedar Valley grasslands, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah sat in her observation blind and watched Atlas with his three nearly grown cubs. They were grooming each other, a social bonding activity that lions use to reinforce pride cohesion. Atlas lay on his side, his massive frame relaxed, while Leo chewed on his father's ear and Marcus attempted to bite his tail. Athena, always more dignified than her brothers, simply rested her head on Atlas's shoulder. It was peaceful, it was normal, and it existed only because one father had refused to walk away. Sarah thought about how humans tell themselves that we're different from animals because we make choices that defy our base instincts. We sacrifice for our children. We care for the sick. We protect the weak. We love beyond the limits of biological programming. But watching Atlas, she realized that maybe the line between human and animal wasn't as clear as we pretended. Maybe devotion existed across species. Maybe love, or something so close to love that the distinction didn't matter, was written into the fabric of life itself. Maybe God designed creation with more compassion built into its foundation than we gave credit for. The research station received a letter 3 months after Sarah's initial documentation began. It was from a single father in Oregon who had seen a short documentary clip about Atlas and the cubs. He wrote, "I lost my wife 2 years ago to a sudden heart attack. She left me with 3 kids under age 5. I've been drowning ever since, convinced I couldn't do this alone, that I wasn't equipped to be both mother and father. Then I saw your footage of that lion. I watched him refuse to give up on his cubs, even when nature itself seemed to be saying they were doomed. If he could do that, I thought, then maybe I can keep going too. I know it's silly, finding inspiration in an animal, but that's what happened. So thank you. Thank you for showing me that sometimes love means just not walking away, even when everything is hard." Sarah read that letter 3 times. She cried during the second reading. During the third, she felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that the work she did mattered in ways she hadn't fully appreciated. This wasn't just about data collection or species preservation. It was about understanding our place in the larger story of life on this planet. It was about finding hope in unexpected places. It was about learning that strength comes in many forms, And sometimes the bravest thing a father can do is simply stay. The last time Sarah saw Atlas and his family was 9 months after that desperate morning when Keisha first walked away from her cubs. The pride was moving to new territory, following the seasonal migration of their primary prey. Marcus, Leo, and Athena were now strong, capable young lions. They would stay with the pride for another year or so before the males would be driven out to find their own territories. That's simply how lion society works. Athena would likely remain, eventually becoming a full hunting member of the pride alongside her mother and aunts. Atlas walked at the front of the group, his mane glorious in the morning light, his bearing every bit the king he was. Behind him came Keisha, fully recovered, and beside her walked Luna and Zara. The 3 cubs moved together, occasionally racing ahead to chase birds, then circling back to the adults. It was a family, not perfect, not following any prescribed natural pattern, but functional and thriving. They had survived because one father had seen value where nature suggested there was none. They had survived because love, or instinct, or stubbornness, or whatever name you want to give it, had proven stronger than evolutionary programming. Sarah packed up her equipment that day with mixed emotions. She would miss this pride. She would miss watching these particular lions navigate their complicated, beautiful lives. But new research projects awaited, new animals to study, new stories to document. Before she left, she wrote a final note in her field journal. In the savanna of Wyoming's grasslands, I learned that nature's greatest treasure isn't the strongest or fastest creature. It's the one willing to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Atlas didn't accumulate wealth or expand his kingdom during these months. He invested in 3 small lives that the world had written off. And in doing so, he became richer than any territory or food source could ever make him. His treasure walks beside him now, alive because he refused to abandon them. Perhaps that's what true power looks like, not the ability to take, but the courage to give everything for those you love. This story spread far beyond wildlife circles. It reached fathers struggling with custody arrangements. It reached mothers facing impossible medical decisions. It reached people who felt inadequate, overwhelmed, and alone in their responsibilities. The story of Atlas became a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring what everyone expects you to do. It means standing guard when you're exhausted. It means carrying burdens that aren't officially yours. It means showing up every single day, even when every instinct tells you to walk away. God created a world where survival often demands ruthlessness. But he also wove into that same world the capacity for mercy, for sacrifice, for love that transcends self-interest. Atlas couldn't have explained his choices in words. He didn't need to. His actions spoke a language older than human speech, the language of a parent who looks at vulnerable life and decides that protecting it matters more than following the rules everyone else accepts. So I'll ask you now, as this story comes to its close, do you believe that animals can love? Do you think Atlas felt something beyond instinct when he carried those cubs back to their mother? Have you ever witnessed, in your own life, with your own eyes, a moment where someone stayed when they should have left, fought when they should have surrendered, loved when logic suggested giving up? Tell me in the comments. Share your story. Because these tales of unexpected devotion, they matter. They remind us that we're all part of something larger than ourselves. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own struggles, your own moments of doubt and courage, then it reached you for a reason. The algorithm didn't bring you here by accident. You needed to hear about a father who refused to walk away. You needed to be reminded that nature, and life, contains more hope than we sometimes remember. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please consider supporting us by looking for the Thanks button with the heart icon below the video so we can continue sharing more moving stories. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Leave a like if Atlas's journey inspired you. Comment below about which part of this story resonated most deeply with your soul. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about a father's unwavering love. These stories matter. Your engagement helps them reach people who need them most. See you in the next story, where nature will once again remind us that miracles happen in the most unexpected places.